good? Jason Barger.
Yes, ma'am.
Welcome to the Carrie Croft Show.
Oh, it's great to be here. The audience is wonderful.
I mean, it is, isn't it?
It's great. It's great.
All right, so Jason, you and I know each other via Gretchen Dusseau.
Yes.
My spouse, my business spouse, right?
Yeah,
So I have had the opportunity to get to know you on a personal level, which has been an absolute joy, FYI.
Likewise.
I've enjoyed our relationship, and you've helped us from a business perspective. I just think you're a bang-up great human, along with all the Cottingham sisters and all of the, all your whole crew over there. Nothing but love. So you, in particular, have a very interesting story, in my opinion.
Okay.
First of all, when Gretchen first told me about you, this is before I knew you, right? Back when we were first courting each other, and she'd be like, "Listen, Jace, my brother-in-law, like
Joss,
Joss,
Joss, and then some cackling,
yes, but she
voice.
was very booming with pride for booming.
I love Gretchen,
and who doesn't, right? You can't not love Gretchen Dusseau.
Amen.
So she would tell me about you, and she was just in awe of what you had done. And I was like, wait a minute. So this guy had a job. He's married to your sister, had a job, and just decided one day he's going to go live in the airport. I was like, that is so fucking weird, but like so cool. Like that's something that only probably Gretchen and I would think in our crazy heads, right? So walk me through where you were in your life. And then what were it may not have been one aha moment, but like, what was that like Lincoln to where you're like, you know what, this is it. Like, this is what I need to do. Let's start with that. Because
let's just dive right into that.
Let's go into that.
Yeah. So where was I in life? So, I had been running a summer camp for kids, Camp Akita, shout out to everybody who ever went there. And the wonderful humans that I was able to be around in that whole 10 years of my life of that, I was taking people and building houses internationally for families living in poverty, where literally we built 125 homes for families that were literally living in the dirt in Mexico and the Dominican Republic, and then leading a program that we started to serve the homeless living on the shelter system outside of the shelter system in downtown Columbus. So bringing meals and blankets and basic supplies to people literally in the middle of winter living out under bridges and stuff. So I'm doing all this great stuff that I'm lucky to get to do for 10 years. And I was already kind of running everything, and I was still a pretty young guy. And I just knew that there was a next challenge of some sort for me. And so I am a strange guy who made that decision.
Right.
But there was it was a creative, for some reason, this metaphor of air travel in all my travels to different places to do all this cool stuff we were doing. I just kept thinking air travel is such a great metaphor for the way that we move through the world every day, literally. And then I knew in order to write this book, which I had no idea whether I could write a book and whether anyone would care, but if I was going to try, I knew I needed to go and like throw myself into the environment. And so I spent 7 days living in 7 different airports. I went from Columbus to Boston to Miami to Chicago to Minneapolis to Seattle to San Diego, 7 cities in 7 days, literally without leaving the airports, and sleeping on floors and in chairs that aren't as comfortable as the ones we're sitting in, and just watching people. And then wrote my first book, Step Back from the Baggage Claim.
Now, when you were there, were you writing at the same time, or were you just observing?
So I was not sleeping much, as you can guess. And so, I had this old crappy laptop at the time. I mean, quit my job. Amy and we had 2 young kids at the time. We now have 3. Yeah. And she was on maternity leave, actually. And so we made this decision that it was time to jump out into this space and allow a little. We had no idea what was going to happen. We even had some very honest conversations about, hey, nothing may come of this. I may get back from this weirdo trip, and where I'm trying to write a book that I've never tried to do, and I may say I got nothing. And like I've quit my job. You're on maternity leave. We got 2 young kids. We've just spent money for me to go to these 7 different cities, but without even going there, just living in the airports. And I might say, I got nothing. But the whole time I'm there, I'm on with this crappy laptop. I'm up all day in all these different airports watching people and just cranking away ideas. And it's, it's not about, it uses air travel as a metaphor, but it's not about airports. It's about how we move throughout the world and how we intersect with people, and what difference does it make of how I approach that path.
Okay, so more on that. But let's take a park real quick for Amy.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to put myself in her shoes at the time. I'm like, hold on a minute. I'm on maternity leave. My husband just quit his job and he wants to go to the airport for 7 days. Yeah. Either you have some money stashed where you're not worried about it, or she's saying, all right, mofo, you better make it work. Like, was she had to have, like, was she just totally unwavering? So first of all,
let's just get this out here. Like, I say, like, literally I say a prayer every day that I'm grateful that I get to be with Amy.
Yeah.
Like, so she's the best. And at the time, no, we didn't have some pile of money. We both, I mean, she was a
teacher, right?
She was a teacher. Again, she was on maternity leave, so she's, not getting a paycheck. But she was a special education, so she's not like she's making a lot of money. And all the nonprofit stuff I was doing and working for, and a church that owned and operated all this stuff, like, I'm not making any money either. And so, we had been smart with our money, and I'm a thoughtful saver and somebody that, so we knew we weren't being reckless, but at the same time, we knew what we needed to do is give a little bit of time and space to see what was going to happen and allow ourselves, like, I thought of it as kind of investing in myself and in us and what this creation would be. And to her credit, as soon as I pitched this weirdo idea, her first response was, like, literally, this is her first response was, good. Like, good, you should. And then she said, like, when I said I want to go sleep in airports and attempt to write this book, she said, good, you should. And then she looked at me and she said, go. Like,
God, she's a boss, isn't she?
Yeah, she is.
But you're a boss too, because I want to take a minute for everybody out there who just doesn't necessarily believe in themselves or believe that something's possible for themselves. And I literally was sitting across from Reagan yesterday having a conversation similar about, how many people sit and wish and pine over what could be, like, in their mind, but they just don't have that sort of audacious belief in themselves and being able to jump off a bridge. And it's like, you weren't in a situation where it's like, okay, this isn't scary at all financially. This isn't going to totally change. Like, it's never going to be a cozy, safe nook where you're like, this is easy. It's scary.
Yeah.
And you're afraid, but you did it anyway.
Yeah, and I think part of it is that I didn't. Yes, I had moments, by the way, especially after I got back from the airports and I'm writing this book, and people around me are like, "Wait, what? But what are you doing?" And nobody quite understood, and people started to get worried. Like, well, like, what's really going on here? And I had my moments where I'd have days where, like, wow, what am I doing? And literally stop and say, all right, hold on a second. I can't get trapped in that thinking. And I really trained myself in a lot of ways to, like, I just didn't spend much time thinking about the what ifs this doesn't work. And really, I kept reminding myself, a couple things just that came to my mind when you said that. The poet Eugene Ware said, all glory comes from daring to begin. All glory comes from daring to begin. And so that dare was just like, hey, I don't know what's going to come at the end of this, but am I willing to go? And then when you're willing to go, then other paths will open, right? Mm-hmm. And so when I got back from that and I'm writing, and I'm, again, I have no idea whether this makes any sense to anyone outside of my own head and whether it's going to mean anything. And I certainly didn't know this was going to then become my job. But you have those moments where I had this giant, which I still do, giant dry erase board in my office where I write up things to myself, and it's my own visual kind of playground. And I had a couple of quotes that I put up there at the very beginning as just reminders every single day. One of them said, courage is sitting in ambiguity. And am I going to be willing enough to be uncomfortable and or have the courage to kind of sit in that space of ambiguity before I know how this is going to play out?
Got it. That I feel that big right now.
Yeah,
big.
Totally. Big. Anytime you're taking a leap to do anything or put yourself out there to show up and even to do this podcast, and who are you? Who cares? Any of those feelings, you got to have courage to kind of sit in the ambiguity and remember the purpose of, wait, why are you compelled to do it? And so I returned, why am I writing this book? And it was about the message and the spirit and the message that I wanted to convey to myself and to the world. And like, I needed to just live in that space. And the other quote that I put up there, or just a reminder to myself, was I just said, dive into the craft. And so anytime the narrative or the stories would start to creep in my head of what if, and wait, how is this going to ever lead to anything, and what will we possibly do? And I got 2 kids and I got a wife. Like, and any of that stuff started creeping in, I'd say, dive into the craft, get real and go write it, and have courage to sit in ambiguity.
And like that, the biggest thing with that is just believe in yourself. We believe in all these other things and other people and whatever, but like, you believed in Jason. And but you have to believe in you before I think even anyone else can, or it even matters that anybody else does. You have to buy in and believe in yourself that you can do it. Yeah,
for sure. And I think, but I think at least my focus at the time, it was not, it wasn't belief. It wasn't too much. I know what you're saying, and I agree with it. You have to believe in your ability to have the courage to sit in ambiguity. And I had to believe in myself that I could do that. And I could believe in myself that I could attempt to write this. But part of the belief was to be okay with whatever it would become.
Right.
And so I'm not believing in myself as if just that I'm some superhuman special person.
Right.
I have belief that even if this is a total disaster and nobody cares, and what I wrote was awful, and it doesn't lead to anything, that I'd come back and I'd at least have had the courage to try something creative and to put myself out there and then learn from it and go.
Yeah. But didn't you always know it would lead to something?
For sure.
So, I think that's a part of it too, is like, you don't know what you're doing exactly or what the outcome's going to be. You follow your gut and your passion, and you just know that something good will come out of it. You don't know the end goal. You don't know. You just know something, it's going to lead you closer to what you need to be close to.
No doubt. And I kept, again, part of the diving into the craft and reminding myself of that was reminding myself, stay rooted in the purpose of the message and not in some external anything. I wasn't thinking about money. I wasn't thinking about, fame or anything like that. I was thinking about, was what I was trying to communicate, was the message compelling to anyone?
Yeah. So when you were in the airport, there have to be like some like specific memories or incidents or things. Like what were the main, like what are the snapshots in your head of being in that airport that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, hilarious things of you're sleeping in these awful conditions. I gave myself like $20 a day, which goes
So you basically bought a water and peanuts.
Yeah, I had like a cup of coffee, and I, at the end of the book, I actually track everything that I spent, and I share that in the back of the book. But, so all these funny things. But then there were people, and of course, the name of the book, Step Back from the Baggage Claim, that central image of watching people in every city at all hours of the day, the buzzer thing goes off, and everybody goes rushing up to the baggage carousel. We bum rush up against the cold metal, and we form what I call the human wall of entitlement, where nobody can actually see the bags, and I'm in more of a hurry than you are, and my bag's more important. We're pushing each other out of the way, and grandma's over there getting run over, and people aren't stopping to help. And I watched that same thing, and I kept asking myself, if that's the way we are moving in the airports, maybe we're doing that in other areas of our lives. And what does it mean to step back and actually think about that differently? And that's certainly the central image of the book that then everything builds off of. But I remember being in Boston late one night in the airport, and I'd saved $6 left. And so I said, I'm going to go have a beer, and I'm going to go sit up at the counter. I'm going to have a beer. I'm going to relax at the end of a day before they kick us out of there, and I'm going to go find some place to sleep. And this guy comes in, and he is your classic like Northeastern part of the country guy's got an accent and everything, and he's like, "Hey, they serving any effing drinks in here?" And he says it to me right away, and he of all the open seats in the whole place, he comes and he sits right next to me, and then he turns to the bartender and he's like, "Hey, you serving any effing drinks?" And the guy's like, "Yeah, we got some drinks." He's like, "Well, give me a effing vodka and cranberry," or something, something like that. And he keeps going, and he keeps turning to me and chirping at me and all this stuff. And next thing I look around, like, okay, this guy's clearly going to become my buddy. Like, he chose to sit right next to me. And about 30 minutes into this, like, bantering back and forth, and him super brash about everything, he all of a sudden he stops and he goes, "My dad just had an effing stroke." And all of a sudden it just went silent. And for the next 30 minutes then, I literally just sat there and I barely said a thing. And this guy just started talking about his dad and how he was going on a trip home to be with his dad who just had a stroke, and unloading all this like baggage. And I'm just sitting there. And in the book, I talk about this kind of concept of the ministry of availability. And like, again, outside of any kind of religious connotation that you may have, or maybe that is helpful to you, but this idea of what does it mean to just be available for people when they need it? And literally I just sat there and he talked for 30 minutes and I just listened and nodded, and he just wanted me to be there in presence with him. And then after about 30 minutes of him talking about his dad, he said, "I got to catch my plane." And he turned to me and he said, like, "Hey, tell those kids of yours." I said, "Hey," like as if somehow I knew this guy. And then this guy, Jack, goes walking out of the bar. And I had things like that happen where I wasn't telling people what I was doing, but these really...
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Like, I just find that the fact that you chose to do that so extraordinary, and I just am in awe of that decision, and I think it's just the coolest thing in the world. I really do.
Thanks.
And so that led you then, you've written 4 books now.
Yeah.
And so you have Step Away from the Baggage Claim, Remember, Breathing Oxygen, and then Thermostat Cultures. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
So it might be like picking your children, so you may not be able to answer this, but do you have a favorite book, or that one that you enjoyed the most writing, or one that, like if somebody said, "Hey, Jason, you got to pick one and run with it," would you be able to pick one?
No, well, no, it is like a kid, but I would say it's like the continuation of my thinking of where I was at each time of writing the book, and each one of them builds off of each other. And so it's impossible to say, "Hey, this is my favorite." I mean, Step Back from the Baggage Claim was the beginning, and that was the daring to begin, and that was the, wow, I have no idea if I can do this and if anybody will care, right? And then fortunately that allowed me to then ask the next question and ask myself, was I going to be willing to dare again? Or was I like, "Hey, yeah, I did that, I proved that," and like it resonated with a lot of people, and then kind of just rest on that? Or was I going to be willing to create again? And so when Remember came out, that I think it was the next kind of iteration of where I was, and certainly it was starting to, more and more companies and organizations were connecting to the work that I was doing and developing people and culture and clarity around mission, vision, and values. And so that began a whole nother kind of thing. And then this, as I was watching and learning of what they're really looking for and asking about, it was all about culture. And so Thermostat Cultures was my attempt to say, hey, inside of all these organizations that I'm lucky to be then supporting now, is how do you proactively shape culture? We all talk about culture, and certainly in the world now, everybody talks about how important culture is. And we see that across organizations and every team on the planet. And yet not a lot of places have defined, well, what is it? And how do we proactively shape it and set the temperature that we want? So, Thermostat Culture was back that. And then my most recent book, Breathing Oxygen, is, that's probably the one right now that I would say, because it's coming out of the pandemic, coming out of this 3 years of weirdo world, of all the culmination of all those other books and everything that I've been lucky to get to experience and support teams and organizations all over the place, is like, well, how do I breathe good oxygen into you? How do I breathe good oxygen into myself? And what are teams and organizations doing to get out of toxic kind of mindsets and thinking and actually be a place that creates meaningful work cultures and leads an environment that people actually want to be a part of. And so that's a long way of saying, I don't know if I could pick just one of them, but they all build upon each other.
Now, with writing a book, being a speaker and going into companies, like that kind of is a logical next step. Being a speaker, was that natural for you? Like, did you love getting up in front of people, or do you have like that sort of like, I suck, they're going to hate me? Do you get nervous before, or are you over that? Or like, do you have any like ritual or weird thing before you get out and talk to people?
I have rituals and weird things of just preparing, and again, I everything I do, I return back to why am I doing it, and I connect myself to what is the purpose behind and the message and the mission that I'm a part of.
Yeah,
and that is the driving piece. Anytime somebody says to me, which I have people all the time say, man, I love, like, that's so cool that you get to be on stages, or that you, like, man, I would love for people to, I mean, most people in the world, it scares them to death.
Yep.
Then there's other people that are really drawn to that, like the tension of that. And I just said, I just don't even think about it that way. That I don't spend time thinking about the stage. I spend the time thinking about what's the message. And then I just happen to be the messenger. And I feel like it's a really grateful thing and a privilege that places and people want you to share your mind and your heart with them, and because it's going to add value to what they're trying to do. And so I take that seriously. So I don't get nervous from the sense of like, I can't do this, or I don't know how to do this. I get I don't even know what the right word is, that I want to be prepared, and I just want to do a great job for them. They had me there, and so I want to make a contribution. And so the speaking side of it is certainly that planting of seeds. And then I'm lucky to work with teams and organizations over a longer period where I'm helping to support leadership development initiatives, a culture shaping strategy and initiatives, clarity around mission, vision, values stuff to help them work through where they're going. So I get to then water the seeds and be a part of that process. And I like each piece of that, the content creation, the planting of seeds, and the kind of watering of the seeds.
Well, I was a recipient at one point. I went to Thermostat Cultures, which is an event that you put together, and I bring it up not only because it is something else you've layered on, kind of curating this amazing event for whether it's business owners or just business people, or just people to come in and try to understand how you can, be better with whatever it is you're doing. And you bring in really amazing people. And I will tell you that when I went with Courtney and Gretchen, you had someone, and her name's escaped me, and the name of her company has escaped me, but I follow her. And to this day, I think about her mission. She's the one that does the loans for people, all like the people doing
Jessica Jackley.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember, and what's the name of her company?
Kiva.org.
Yeah.
So KIVA.org.
Yeah. So I bring that up because, as a participant, I remember leaving there, and I've thought about it so many times since. It planted this seed in me where I was like, now that is amazing. That's someone who gets it. And like, what am I doing? Like, it really but it made me feel that way. It made me feel like you can do more. Like, it was a big inspiration for me. And so, for you to bring that to people is just, it's amazing. I mean, it really is cool. The whole Thermostat Cultures, like, it's really, it's incredible.
Oh, it again started as just an idea of I'm lucky to get to go to a bunch of different events and be contributed in the speaking ways or at other people's events and other company events. And I just had the thought of, hey, what would be cool is to host my own at some point where I get to then, and I can have it be kind of the non-conference conference is the way I kept thinking about it, is, to have a dialogue with just a bunch of eclectic, wonderful humans in one room and make it intimate and bring in some great people. So some of the voices that have joined me along the way have just been amazing and continue to be great presences in my life too.
Well, Jason, hammer, nail, you hit it on the head. You really did.
Thank you.
And speaking of doing more and being, more active in, kind of volunteerism or just being a good human.
Yeah.
This is a great segue to talk about something else that you're doing or that you do that I'm so intrigued with that you probably don't talk about. So I heard again through Gretchen Dusseau's, bragging of her brother-in-law, Joss, that you actually visit people in prison who are on death row.
Yeah, so I got this is true, and I don't talk about it a whole lot, but I love to talk about it, or live to share when people are interested in it. And I wrote a chapter in Breathing Oxygen. There's a part in the book where I talk about this experience because I think it's been powerful for me, and certainly I think the story and the message is pretty cool. So I had heard about this actually from shout out to the Reverend Dr. Richard Wing, who way back when who brought up this idea and shared that there are these people that are on death row that have nobody to visit them, and so they are literally awaiting their death, and some of them have a death sentence. They have a time that they know when it's happening. And others that there isn't, and states continue to fight about, and the issue of the death penalty is complex and all that. I totally recognize. And some people then don't have a date, but they're just on death row. And so I wanted to experience that, and I figured that if somebody out there doesn't have anybody that visits them, that why wouldn't I go sit with them? And, so the experience of doing that and of part of it to challenge myself to get out of my own comfort level, and also for I don't know where it's going to lead, but why not be willing to sit with somebody like that? And so you go through this whole process they have to accept you, and you have to pass this kind of through all the protocols to get it, and then eventually you get a chance to go visit them. And so I call his real name I've protected, but I call him Derek. And when I went to meet Derek for the first time, the experience of walking into a prison and going through the first security gates, and you walk up, and by the way, like you see the barbed wire and the high walls, and as soon as you walk in, you start to feel, at least I started to feel a little claustrophobic. And then you go through the first gates, you go through the security checkpoint, you get into the prison. And then in order to get back to the death row part, you go through about 6 different sections of the prison where the bars then close behind you. And each time you do, it feels like it's getting harder to breathe. And so I got all the way back there, and I went into this room, and then a few minutes later, they brought out this guy that I had never met. There's this whole safe email kind of exchange thing that we had done to that point. He'd actually written me a letter and things like that just to say, this is who I am, and yes, I'd love a visitor if you came. And so here they bring out Derek, and he comes out with 2 guards on either side. His feet are shackled, his hands are shackled. He's about 6'4", 300 pounds. This big dude comes walking out, and we never met each other. And they bring him over, and they keep him all shackled right at this table, and we sit there. And next thing you knew, we sat there for 4 hours with each other, and it was like, "Hey, man," And he said, "Well, I'm guessing you probably want to start out and know why I'm in here." And I said, "Well, it crossed my mind, because I don't know. I don't know his story. I don't know anything. I just know he's on death row." And we spent 4 hours then talking about this complex thing and his, as a young adult, being on the streets and wrapped up in gangs and drugs and all this stuff. And, you don't get on death row unless you've killed somebody, and talks about this thing that happened when he was still a teenager, basically. 19 years old or whatever he was. Now he's a 40-some-year-old man, and he's been on death row ever since. And, so it's been I from the very beginning made sure that he understood, hey, I've got no agenda here. I'm not here to tell you what, I'm not here to pretend to understand anything. other than if there's somebody out there who doesn't have anybody visiting him, which he said, yeah, he had had a visitor in 4 years or something, I think. And I can't even remember who it was. But to just sit with him.
What aside from like, I had anxiety a little bit just listening to you talking about going into the prison. I could just feel in my own body, like that would be wild. But what was your emotional, because I also feel really sad right now, just thinking about, regardless of what he did, 20 years ago, there's a human being in there with no one. It makes me really sad.
Oh, for sure.
Were there tears on any end? Like, did he get emotional? Like, or was it more like two bros, like just kind of talking?
It was more like two bros kind of talking and us feeling out. And but internally, the experience of walking into the prison, and again, everything I just described was powerful. And sitting with this giant human who then was vulnerably talking about something that happened, 30 some years ago or whatever it was. And him like talking about the awful thing he did. And yet, and not like trying to make excuses for it or anything, but then talking about his experience now, and that his days are literally spent in a 9-foot by 9-foot cell block. And so what I talk about in the book and what he's made me think about and like how I feel about it is, he talked about there's some days he wakes up and he can see beyond the bars. And he feels like, he's grateful for the friends that he's made and the other around him in his cell block. He's an artist, so he loves to like draw and paint or draw and do these things. So I bought one of his paintings and got a drawing I've got in my office. And he says some days I can see beyond the bars, and other days all I can see is the bars, and I can't. It's debilitating. And the reality of this is my life, and I'm stuck here. And so when after the first time I visited him, to then go back out those bars, and each time I got a little bit closer out, all of a sudden I started to become a little easier to breathe. And then I got out and I went to my car and I literally put the windows down and I couldn't even start my car. I just sat there with the air hitting my face and staring at this giant fortress. And all I kept thinking about is how much I was feeling for him, and again, outside of the awful thing he did, but then thinking how grateful I am that I get to go where I want to go and do what I want to do, and how many of us, everybody that I crossed paths with, then I kept driving home, an hour drive back home from this prison. Every car I pass, I'm looking like, does that person know how lucky they are to go wherever they want to go today and do whatever they want to do? And yet what it's made me think about, and I've talked about with many teams and organizations now, is that we're all really imprisoned by something.
Amen.
Amen. And
Amen.
there are days that we still all, even though we are free, we get imprisoned by these mental bars that we put in front of us. And so even back to what you talked about at the beginning of this chat is like, maybe those mental bars of like, I couldn't possibly try something new, or I couldn't take a risk, or I can't, some people are, imprisoned by their phone and by the image that they think others have of them, what they can and can't do, all of that stuff, right? And so it's challenged me to then think, am I seeing the bars, or am I in my own life seeing beyond the bars? And what does it mean to acknowledge the fictitious bars?
I think we just figured out your next book.
That might be. That might be.
So going back to Derek, taking it a step further.
Yeah. I
could be wrong.
Yeah.
But I doubt Derek had a strong family background. It really makes you, I'm sure you've done this before. We were like, luck of the draw. Like, what if I was born here? What if I was,
totally.
here you are, Jason Barger, I'm Carrie Croft, we're in you. I mean, it's all chance, happenstance of like where, whatever. So how lucky, someone is to have a set of parents,
No doubt.
who their absolute goal in life is to build this other human and make them a good human. And then how sad for someone to feel like they have to go into the street to find their family.
Yep.
And that's where I do have empathy and compassion for people who they were literally trying to survive. Like, did he do wrong? Absolutely. Was it violent? Yes. But I also think about Derek as an infant, as a toddler, as a middle schooler,
Yep.
needing things and not getting them, right? So you happen to have a really amazing set of parents,
Yeah.
right? Let's talk about your parents for a little bit. I know that you lost both of your parents, pretty young, and that has to be pretty hard. But let's talk about your mom and dad, and like what did each of them, like what are the core, like with your mom, it's like, what did she show you? What did your dad show you? And like, what's the overarching sentiment of how they were as parents?
Yeah. So let me connect the dots too to just what you just said, because I can't get it out of my head. Is you'd say the same. I am so grateful and lucky that I was born where I was born, to who I was born into, and that's a fact. In all the trips of building a house for somebody in Mexico or being in the dirt or whatever, to be with this family, to say, they were born there, I was born here, and I don't know why or who or how all that, but that matters. And when you sit with Derek and you hear him play out everything that happened in his early part of his life and what his experiences were, then you can't say, well, okay, well, the outcome kind of makes sense. It's tragic and awful, but when you see that what he went through, that it's in the range of outcomes that you'd be on death row.
Yeah.
Because of what he experienced. And so I think there absolutely to have empathy for him. I remember many a homeless person I sat with and had a meal with and talked about it. And then when I heard what they went through in their life, then you say, well, of course that's why, Mm-hmm. And so, so my parents, I was so lucky to have Jacques, as all my friends called him, my dad, Jack, Jacques, and Sherry, the Share Bear, as my parents. And, they were, I think I took pieces of I know I took many pieces of my parents. And again, I say a prayer of thanks every day for that I got to have them as my parents.
Yeah.
And I get to have friends and family members that support me and believe in me and care about me, right? And my dad was this risk taker, funny, fun, like, let's go. We lived in Egypt when I was 8 years old, and he was on this entrepreneurial thing, and he had all these varying levels of success with different stuff, and some big failures and some, modest success and things, but was willing to kind of go and take a risk and like why not? And so that fun-loving laugh, like creativity and kind of willingness to go, and undenying like belief in me and belief in his kids and all that, like that stays with me. I actually did a podcast of my own recently where I talk about a couple of images and stories that I still think about from my parents and how it still shapes the way I show up now. And so my dad, for sure, in those kind of ways that he just believed in me all the time. My mom was about 5'3" and she had this poofy hair, and yet so she, even with her little like poof, she was still only like 5'3", but she was tough, and she was one of the most, and tough in all the right ways, not like mean tough, like willing to stand up for something she believed in, principled, like going on these journeys with my dad, and at times when finances were challenging, and yet still willing to go live in Egypt and like, let's go. And like, so the most consistent person I think I probably have ever met, that just and I have friends of mine that still recall things my mom said to them or sat down and talked to them about that literally changed the course of their life and like the way they thought. And so she was a doer. She was I'll show up and make it happen.
So a couple things.
Yeah.
You lost your parents really close together.
Yeah.
Right. And I always thought to myself, I'm like, damn, how hard, like that, I grieve my dad already. Like, my dad especially.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine my world without him. And so to lose both of them so close together, I think in my head, if something happens to my parents, it would feel so scary to me that like, wait, so it's just me. I'm like the top tier now before heaven, like, like literally. So like losing them both, but yet learning so much and having the gift of them for the time that you did. How did that sort of evolve in terms of grief and how you're able to manage your I'm sure you still are going to, you grieve them today. You're going to grieve them forever.
For sure. Yeah.
What was that like?
Oh my gosh. And so much of it, gosh, how much time you got?
Hey, as much as I got all the time for you.
What was it like, crushing, to have, I still remember this moment. It was my dad had been having health issues for some time and a number of years, and just was kind of in and out of the hospital all the time. And here he was at this health center, kind of a rehab center, recovering from his latest hospital stint. And at the same time, my mom had then been having these balance issues, and we ultimately find out that she has cancer in her brain. And my dad's in this health center and doesn't even know this is happening. And he's just kind of coming back to it himself. And then my brother and I are in this room at the health center where my mom then is explaining, he's just now coming to, and she's now explaining to him the news that she's just gotten and that she has cancer in her brain. And we're sitting there, and my brother, the room is just thick, and my dad is looking at her like you can tell he can't even comprehend what she's saying, and almost like, is this real? And then my mom crawls into the bed with him.
Oh boy.
And we just all kind of like went. My sister was in Wisconsin, so we were keeping her on the phone and that kind of thing. But my brother and I just kind of walk over, and we're all just huddling on the bed, and she had crawled in the bed and was just kind of cuddling with him. And that began this journey of the next, few years of watching both of them and them struggling separately, but and just trying to be the best, support and kid to them, and obviously handling a lot of the end of life stuff that you end up having to deal with. But I kept just trying to think of it as as shitty as it was, what an honor it was to try to honor my parents that way.
Yeah.
And could I, and here I am, running a business and 3 growing kids, a wife. I'm traveling a lot with work, and I'm all over the place. And yet I've got parents in different hospital beds, and all the insurance stuff, and all the, how we selling the house, and paperwork, and all the stuff. It just became a lot. But it was a way to honor my parents and to say, man, I'm lucky to have you, and hope that we can be those kind of parents to our kids. And, I spent most of the time then just trying to focus on the fact that I got to have them as my parents, not that they died too young. But to your question of how is it, like, that's how I felt, and that's what I went through. And then how I think it, I mean, I still obviously think about it all the time, but I'd say the way that it impacts me the most now is, I mean, and Amy would tell you that, and this is a part of my DNA anyway, but like I am almost obsessively always talking with her about, hey, if there's stuff we want to do, let's go do it. And I think that's already a part of my DNA. But if anything, I think watching my parents go before they thought they would and missing out on the end of life that they were picturing at a much earlier age in my life has caused me to say, man, if there's things we want to do, let's do it. If there's things we want to experience, if we want to tell people we love them and we care about them, we want to be like, don't wait. And so we're trying to do that.
Yeah. So this is an interesting way to sort of like circle back around, because when we started this interview, and I've always, in my head, I've always been like, man, like, how did Jason have the balls to do that? Like, that's so strange to me that like a regular guy from UA would just decide to go to an airport, quit his job, believe in himself. Well, of course, you listen to what you just said about your dad, right? So he believed in you.
That's right.
Therefore, you believed in you.
Yeah, for sure.
And he was a risk taker, and that gave you the belief that, you know what, I can take a risk and win.
Yeah.
You know, and so it really does matter who's raising you and how you're being brought up. And back to Derek, right?
No doubt.
So it is like, wow, of course your range of outcomes was going to be where you are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a really healthy, good thing for us to remember, is because, yeah, you get celebrated about, and people saying, you know, you're really good, or, you know, whatever nice things people say about you, which is wonderful. But like, I'm a collection of the great experiences and people that have believed and breathed oxygen into me, and helped support me and helped me have time and space and an ability to experience the world and think in this way, in ways I know other people didn't get that time and space to do. And that's humbling, because I think it makes me at least very grateful for the people that I've been lucky to be around, and the influences that people like your parents have on you. And it shows you that, like, yeah, you can go, you know, nothing's guaranteed of success or whatever, however you define that anyway, but like, you can go for it. And along the way, you'll learn some stuff along the way, and you can always call another play. Yeah.
And you know what? They breathed oxygen into you, and you in turn have breathed oxygen into people like myself. And I do want to sincerely thank you and tell you, like, I have learned a lot from you. I have the utmost respect for you and what you're doing. I think it's just absolutely incredible. It truly is.
Thank you.
And I really look forward to your next book, Beyond the Bars. I think that is going to be a freaking blockbuster.
Yeah, we may have something here. I'll say right back at you is, it's been an honor to watch, you know, when Gretch first started at this little, you know, I mean, didn't even have a space, and then this little warehousey thing doing things. And our encouragement certainly to her is like, you know, yeah, this is what you love. And to watch the way that you two have gone after this and built a great community and a great product that, again, I enjoy and am grateful for, is just awesome. And it's so cool to watch when people say, yeah, let's create something that will add value to other people. It's awesome.
Gretchen Dusseau has been a huge part of my last decade.
Yeah,
you know,
no doubt.
Love her to death. Always will. Always will.
Yeah.
And with that, please keep following your girl on YouTube. Follow me on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And until next time, guys, keep moving.